Hello everybody, Resonance here, and today I have another expert game for you guys as part of my Break the Meta series for Age of Empires 2. Throughout this series, I'll be showcasing a wide variety of creative and situational strategies, while evaluating how they might stack up in the current metagame. We've all seen our fair share of galley rushes and knights, so today it's time for something completely different. It's time for a 1v1 Franks mirror match in which the game revolves around throwing axemen and not knights. In this expert match, TheViper will be playing against Jordan 23 in a 1v1 on the custom map Hideout. At the top side of the map, we have TheViper playing as the Red Franks, and on the bottom half of the map, we have Jordan 23 playing as the Blue Franks. Now, in the Break the Meta series, I like to showcase strategies, civilizations, and unit choices that are uncommon in competitive Age of Empires 2. Generally speaking, at the top of the ladder, players typically pick from a very limited pool of civilizations rather than all the civilizations that are available in the game. And at the top of the ladder, the Franks is not generally a very common choice, and that's why this match particularly has me interested, because both players are playing as the Franks. The Franks have a couple of problems with them as a civilization, which prevent them from sort of entering that high expert level of Age of Empires 2. For starters, they're generally considered to be a very binary civilization. When you think of the Franks, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Probably knights. Their most notable bonus definitely would be the fact that their knights, cavaliers, and paladins have 20% extra HP. In the Castle Age, that basically balances out to be exactly the same as a free Bloodlines upgrade, which is pretty good. And then once we get on into the late game, their paladins become a powerhouse. They get far more HP than normal paladins do, and that actually makes a pretty significant difference. Like, they're able to live more than one extra hit in combat, and that allows Franks to really come out on top in those neck-and-neck late-game paladin fights. But really, when you think of the Franks, you almost exclusively think about their knights. What else do the Franks really have? Well, not too much. They actually have a really good, full barracks, except for squires. So that means that they get all the way up to champions, they get up to halberdiers, which is pretty cool. Then they have that unique unit, the Throwing Axemen, which we almost never really see. I think that if you ever did a poll and you just asked the entire Age of Empires 2 community what is one of the most underwhelming unique units in Age of Empires 2, I think Throwing Axemen would come up there as perceived to be one of the weaker ones. However, hopefully today I get to show you guys that the Throwing Axemen is not entirely useless and in fact has some interesting situational applications for it, and that's what this game is all about. Believe it or not, even though it's a Franks mirror match and we think about knights when it comes to Franks, actually, this match is all about Throwing Axemen. In fact, the existence of Throwing Axemen as a unit sort of dictates the entire pace of the game and forces both players to constantly change their strategy to deal with that threat. The thing with Throwing Axemen is that, as a unit, they're not super powerful, on paper at least. No one really asked for essentially a ranged long swordsman, which is kind of what it looks like. But really, what I imagine the developers had in mind for the Throwing Axemen is that they wanted something to back up those armies of Frankish paladins. They wanted something in there that could be a counter to sort of halberdiers, because halberdiers are definitely one of the better ways to deal with mass paladins in the late game. Halberdiers are a very, very strong counter unit in that respect, and the Franks have to watch out for that. They have a couple tools against halberdiers, so what I imagine the developers had in mind is that the Elite Throwing Axemen would be something that you bring in with your army of paladins to sort of protect them from that halberdier threat. It's a way to sort of peel the halberds off them and then just kill all of those guys real fast. And the Throwing Axemen is actually very good at dealing with halberdiers, so that's something that we'll see later on in the game. And an application that doesn't really come into play that much in this match is that Throwing Axemen are, of course, very good at dealing with enemy battering rams on the other side of a wall. They're very, very quick at that, so they're actually a pretty interesting unit, and we'll explore later on why Throwing Axemen are utilized here, as opposed to something like hand cannoneers, because I think that's a very, very interesting question. Besides the whole, the Franks are sort of binary in their unit choices, their archery range isn't very good, their light cavalry suck. That's a little bit better in the Forgotten expansion to AoE2 HD on Steam. But in 1.0c, the Franks basically, they got cavalry, they've got infantry, but mostly people do the cavalry. And in the Feudal Age, we're going to see both players going for a very standard 21 population scout rush, which is just pretty good for the Franks in general. Even though this match doesn't revolve around the knights, the Knights are always going to be a viable option, a real threat that both players have to consider, and one of the benefits of going for a 21 pop Scout Rush in a Franks Mirror match, or just in general as the Franks, is that by the time you reach the Castle Age, you already have that stable. That's fantastic. You can make Knights if you want to. You can always have that threat because the stable's already there, and since the Franks, like, besides their whole unit choice thing being a little bit limited, they have an economy bonus, but generally speaking, it's not quite good enough. Getting the free farm upgrades is nice, but you would almost always rather have 50% faster hunting, for example, or your resources last 20% longer, you get loom for free, all those things that we see in the top civilizations you would generally rather have. But what that does mean, though, getting the free farm upgrades, is that these farms are just gonna have more food on them, and it saves a little bit of money, and it makes the Scout Rush certainly better by making your farms better, because that way you get more food for them. Looks like the Viper is going to wander into the wrong neighborhood. I'm sure we've all done this before, but Jordan here, he's on the prowl, patrolling this little corner right here, knowing that the Viper is inevitably going to walk this way, and keeping, good track of the HP on his scouts. That way he makes sure that he doesn't lose any of them, and they all sort of split the damage. And that will add up over time, but it looks like the Viper just content to go play defensively here, sit back with his scouts, and both players are going to be trying to transition into the Castle Age over time. Looks like the gold mine is coming down for the Viper. He is going to be milling those deer at the back. And once you move on to the Castle Age, things are going to get a little bit crazy. When it comes to these sort of Feudal Age Scout versus Spearman fights, it generally boils down to some very, very good micro. And it looks like Jordan will actually have a forward Spearman in here. I like it when players do this because it means that you have a real threat versus your opponent's scouts. And even though it takes a long time for your Spearman to get up here, it adds a lot of depth to this combat. It's going to be all about making sure that you avoid taking any damage from your opponent's Spearman and trying to use your Spearman to go deal with that one. So we'll have to see who has the better control here. It looks like the Viper's going to try and get some free hits on that Spearman, like I said. And both players, scouts on scouts, which is what they want. The Spearmen are fighting each other, but it looks like Jordan's going to try and come up here, and every single hit that he gets on a scout is going to be absolutely massive. But in the meantime, while he's rotating around, he's going to take so much damage from the Viper's own Spearman, and every little hit counts. The Viper certainly has the home field advantage here, though, so I think that Jordan will have to pull out because the Viper is just able to reinforce himself a lot quicker. He can spawn Spearmen out of here, spawn Scouts if he wants, but he's actually going to be very conservative with his resources. The Viper's not going to spend anything extra on defense. Nothing more than he actually has to. And he's doing this, well, because he wants to get to the Castle Age pretty soon. You can see him stockpiling. He's getting there. And he's going to run Jordan out of town. Jordan will not be able to win this engagement, and as a result, he has to pull back. Now, one thing that you guys might have noticed is why don't the players spawn with palisade walls, as if you've been playing the Steam version of Age of Empires 2, it actually comes with a version of Hideout that has palisade walls around it, but both players here are going to be playing the version of Hideout without the palisade walls, and that means that they're also going to have to go build their own. In terms of the maps, I have to say that both players' maps are pretty good, and that the Viper is, all of his minerals are sort of at the back of his base, and the rush distance here, it's really hard for Jordan to actually get to those minerals unless he walks around the left side, but it still takes forever. He has to walk around the entire map, as we see the Viper chasing him to go do that. So these are a lot easier to defend. The Viper could certainly, close off this gap, for example, and protect all of his back resources, and Jordan happens to have a really safe back stone, and he has an extra gold here at the front, which is great, and his main gold is also somewhat easily defensible, so both players will be able to hold the line here quite nicely. It looks like Jordan is going to get a spear thrust straight through that Spearman's heart. Brutal, and he's down for the count. Not going to be fighting anymore. Jordan will be the one to get to the Castle Age a little bit sooner. Now, of course, I don't think I mentioned this yet, but I actually do have the Voobly spectator dashboard in this game, which you've hopefully already noticed. I have this because this replay is actually fairly recent. Most of the Break the Meta replays that I showcase are from around 2010 to 2011, so before the Voobly spectator dashboard really came into play, so it's not really compatible with those, but this match was played in September 2015, which means we actually do get this futuristic, crazy spectator dashboard, which is absolutely awesome. Definitely love using this, and I'm glad that I can finally put it in an episode of Break the Meta. If you happen to come across any really interesting recent expert games on AOC Zone or Voobly, if you're watching any sort of competitive streams, feel free to go send them my way. I'll have some instructions in the video description. Just make sure that you follow the instructions word for word, and I'd be happy to go take a look at those replays. Alright, so it looks like Jordan will be, a reasonable 30 seconds ahead to the Castle Age. That certainly does matter. And it looks like he's going to start with one town center and, followed by a second one. So I think both players are going to be putting down 2 TCs. Is this a monastery? It is. So again, like I mentioned earlier, knights are a real threat in this matchup, and of course, you want to be thinking about what if your opponent goes for knights. And in the early Castle Age, you don't really get that luxury of being able to just make pikemen, because they have to research pikemen. It costs so much food, so much gold, it takes forever to research. It's just not very efficient. Like, if you're using spearmen and pikemen versus, knights and cavaliers and whatnot in the late game, you kind of rely on the fact that you will inevitably have more spearmen, more pikemen than your opponent, because they don't trade one for one. They trade cost efficiently, assuming you have greater numbers than your opponent, and you're gonna have greater numbers because they're cheaper. But in the Castle Age, the dynamic is actually backwards. You have to research pikemen first, and your opponent can just make knights. So you're probably gonna have equal or fewer pikemen than your opponent has knights, but if you have equal, you're still going to lose that fight. So pikemen, not such a great option in the beginning of the Castle Age, but you know what is? Monks. Knights are very, very expensive. They have their own counters for sure, and if you happen to lose a knight to a conversion, that's devastating. Not only did you lose a knight, but you gave your opponent another knight. That's as bad as losing two. So monks are, of course, the king of the value game here. They want to be converting the very expensive units like the knights, taking advantage of that, and that is why we're going to see a monastery out for both players. One thing that's pretty cool is that both of them are only on one stable. They ended up going for a 2-town center opening with a monastery rather than building a secondary stable. And that's because they know that, as bizarre as it is, the Frank Spear match doesn't really revolve around knights as much. Knights are always an option, and there's something that you can throw in the late game, but knights are much better in a team game than they are in a 1v1, especially on a map like Hideout, where the rush distance, while both players' town centers are pretty close to each other if you just drew a line, you have to walk around this entire tree line, and that means that in practice the rush distance is actually quite far, and this map is easier to defend than, say, Arabia. You're able to wall off this area, you could wall off this area later, and as a result, knights like to get under players' town centers into people's wood lines and just pick off their villagers, because the knight is just such a resilient unit with high attack damage. It's great for raiding, it has great armor too. But you don't generally get to do as much raiding in a 1v1 situation like this. And not only that, but massing up too many knights, paladins, and cavaliers is a massive gold sink, and you don't have access to a trade line in a 1v1. Every penny is precious. Gold's a finite resource here, so both players have to make sure that they spend it carefully. It's going to be a lot less in the mid to late game stages of the game about making what's particularly really strong for your civilization, but rather playing the value game, making sure that you're getting the most mileage out of your resources than your opponent. Taking efficient trades will add up over time, and even having an extra 1,000 gold because you, say, pass on a paladin upgrade definitely matters, and it looks like Jordan will be able to secure those relics. Relic's also going to be a point of contention here. What makes Hideout such an interesting map is it's sort of like a hybrid between, Arabia and Arena, where we're seeing just a little bit of everything. We're not going to see some crazy monk war with mangonels and whatnot as you generally would see on Arena, but at the same time, players aren't going to go all out with the early game aggression. Hideout is a very tricky map to play well because it's just such an interesting and unique map, and it looks like, is Jordan going to be putting down another town center? Both players here content to boom up, not going to make too many knights. In fact, I like that neither of them actually got scale barding armor because they know that they can't really get in there with those knights, might as well save a little bit of resources. Both players have a pretty strong makeshift wall off, funnel them in with the choke points, and you'd have to get a lot of knights out to be able to deal with those monks. And Frank's light cavalry suck. You can't give them bloodlines, so they have fairly low HP, not really wowing anybody. You can still use them against monks, but both players are a little bit discouraged to try and do that. And it looks like we are going to see some heavy stone mining for Jordan, and I expect the Viper. Yes, the Viper is also heavily on stone. They're both thinking about throwing axemen here, and actually the Viper will be able to get up to the next age incredibly quickly, and I believe that Jordan will be close behind him. Actually, in fact, I think that no, Jordan is not going to be close behind him. Jordan has a much lower amount of resources in general, so the Viper will be able to get to the Imperial Age first. He's so very close in the resources stockpile. That's just because Jordan is grabbing all those upgrades, grabbing the handcart, grabbing the town watch, and he's getting ready. He'll be a little bit behind here, but I think that's absolutely fine. Both players going to try and wait until they get to the Imperial Age before any major combat begins, but it's coming. It looks like Jordan will swing around the back with a couple of knights to go see what he can get. But with all those town centers around, I think the Viper is plenty safe, and he'll be just fine in the situation. The Viper is building his university right now, which will allow him to advance to the Imperial Age as soon as that's finished, and he might actually get a successful knight conversion off here. But aha! Jordan with some sick micro and reaction speed here is actually going to delete both of his knights in time, so that way the Viper gets nothing from those conversions. And that really mitigates a lot of the loss that you get if your opponent converts a knight, if you can just delete it in time. But you have to pay really close attention to which knight your opponent is converting, and Jordan just deletes both of them to be safe, and I believe the Viper targeted both knights anyway, and it pays off. But look at the Viper here, planning ahead. He's actually going to get the scale mail armor upgrade while he's going to the Imperial Age, and he's putting down a bunch of barracks. Here's the thing. It's a Frank Smear match. Paladins are a real thing. They're the best Frank unit, and you know, if you've played against the Franks at all, you know exactly how scary Paladins are, especially with that extra HP. They're a real threat. So both players are going to plan accordingly here and just build a ton of barracks. Look at the Viper building a bunch of these preemptively. He's going to get that pikeman upgrade soon. He's getting all of his infantry upgrades right now. He needs to make these halberdiers for two reasons. One, to deal with those knights that could come his way eventually, and two, also so that he can save some gold. The Viper throughout this entire match is going to be incredibly conservative with his gold, whereas Jordan is going to be a little bit more aggressive. And at the end of the game, we're going to see which approach pays off a little bit more, as I actually haven't seen the end of it. I never watched the game all the way through, just so I'm as surprised as you guys are when we see the conclusion. Both players here are going to be snagging all of their infantry upgrades, and meanwhile, while Jordan, does his little wall on the left-hand side, he's going to send his knights in to do a little bit of raiding, and that forces some idle time. An important concept to keep in mind is that even if you don't kill an enemy villager, just forcing your opponent to garrison a bunch of them in his town center, those villagers aren't actually gathering any resources at all in that time, and that is some significant economic damage. It's difficult to quantify, but it does matter. And that's what makes the early game Dark Age militia rush so good. Even though the militia might lose to the villager with Loom, it's okay. If the villager fights you back, it's not gathering, and that's great. So let's talk a little bit, like, halberdiers and pikemen make sense here, but why on earth throwing axemen? Well, it's like a mind games thing. You know your opponent is thinking about halberdiers because he's thinking you're going to make knights. So you can make throwing axemen because throwing axemen are great against halberdiers. It's confusing, but bear with me. That's how it works. And now here's the deal. Like, why throwing axemen and not hand cannoneers? Because the Franks do get hand cannoneers, and hand cannoneers are a great deterrent against infantry units. They're so very strong against halberdiers, and they're pretty good against throwing axemen as well. Why are we not seeing any hand cannoneers opening up here? There's a couple of reasons for this. For starters, if you build a bunch of archery ranges in the early game, really, like, you have to get all these upgrades. You have to get chemistry, you have to get all the archer armor upgrades at the blacksmith. That's a pretty big drain on your food and gold in the early, Imperial Age, and that you really can't afford to actually make that expenditure when you're doing a Frank Smear match at such a high level of Age of Empires 2 play. It can really cost you because you're not getting as much mileage out of your upgrades as you would be if you were, say, building Throwing Axemen. Throwing Axemen had the benefit of you were already in this mirror match going to get your infantry upgrades. You were already going to get tracking, scale mail armor. You were already going to get all those things because you know your opponent could go for knights, and you have to be prepared for that if that happens. You also have to save your gold. You're already going to get those infantry upgrades, so throwing axemen, you get to double dip here. You get the best of both worlds. Whereas if you go for some like hand cannoneers, I mean, you're building all those archer ranges. You're not going to make elite skirmishers probably in a Frank Smear match most of the time until the super late game where there's no gold left. So in the short run, it's terrible for you. It's just not that efficient. You're not going to get great use out of chemistry, all those archer armor upgrades, and also, here's an interesting thing with the Throwing Axemen. Right now we see they have 50 HP, but if you upgrade them to Elite Throwing Axemen, they have 60 HP, meaning that they live in Onager Blast, which does 50 damage. That is crucial. Franks don't get Siege Onagers, they only get regular Onagers. That's a 50 damage AoE blast. Throwing Axemen, Elite Throwing Axemen will live that Onager shot. They will live Bombard Cannon shots, whereas Hand Cannoneers with their measly 35 HP will not, and they will die. So that is actually a very, very relevant thing, and Throwing Axemen have this bizarre benefit of actually being able to apply some forward pressure, as we see here. Jordan moving in with his own Throwing Axemen, threatening to blow up a couple of houses, get the first building destroyed of the game. And the Viper, meanwhile, is going to apply pressure on this side. Jordan put a gate here because he originally thought he was going to be the aggressor, but now he realizes it's time to just put millions of layers of stone walls and be content with it. Throwing Axemen are a great deterrent for your opponent to make, halberdiers. Like, suddenly it just feels bad making pikemen then, and then you can also threaten to transition into your own knights. We see here that the Viper not so satisfied, actually, with his pikeman choice this game. They're really not getting... he's not really getting that much mileage out of that. Meanwhile, Jordan just putting so much pressure. He's going to try and force his way in here, get a villager kill, and the Viper's like, oh my god, I made all these pikemen expecting Jordan to make knights, and he just has nothing but throwing axemen. However, the Viper here going to engage critically when he has Elite Throwing Axemen just like a second before Jordan does, and as a result, that is going to allow him to come out a little bit on top in this engagement. Actually, it looks like the spectator dashboard's a little bit out of sync, but still, Jordan has too many military units, so the Viper will have to back up, get some conversions, and aha! It looks like Jordan is going to be making some onagers. This is what I was talking about, right? I love onagers. I feel like they're a unit that in 1v1s is not quite utilized enough, but I'm a stickler for the value game, very biased in that respect. I love trading 2 for 1, if not more, and that's what onagers are great for. Jordan is going to be going for onagers, but I haven't seen any from the Viper yet, and I don't think he'll make any. We'll have to see. This is more of Jordan's thing, and he's going to grab siege engineers for this as well to allow him to get the first shot. Extra range is critical on these onagers, and as a result, again, the Viper very much deterred from going for hand cannoneers. It's an option, and it's not a bad one, but throwing Axemen are better than they sound, and unfortunately Jordan will leave that onager unescorted, will get picked off by a knight that spawns straight out of the stable. Meanwhile, both players going to be sissy fighting over on this side, but that bombard cannon, also a critical part of the civilization matchup, will be a good deterrent to those onagers, and will sort of protect his battering rams a little bit, but Jordan, meanwhile, has a bunch of siege workshops. You know, when I think about my own play a lot, I've seen so far in this game that both players are making a ridiculous amount of siege workshops, and I feel like usually I'm waiting a lot for my own siege weapons to come out and reinforce my army, and I see that both of these guys are just being very, very liberal with their siege workshop usage, so perhaps that's something that I should do myself. Now, one thing that's cool about Hideout as well that we see coming into play here is that since both players, essentially share the same wood line and they're very, very close to each other, this means that as the game drags on, suddenly you can just build a watchtower here, be super cute like Jordan, and zone the Viper off his wood line. Does a lot of eco damage. He need to retask all those villagers, he loses all sorts of buildings. I think he had a town center over here that died to that trebuchet, so I love how cute Jordan's being here. Little value plays like that will certainly add up over time and really just put a wrench in the Viper's plans. He's gonna have to move his town center, all that economy, a little bit further in the back, and this means that should Jordan ever decide that he wants to come in through this wall, although it doesn't look like he's going to do that anytime soon with these extra layers, he could, kind of trash the Viper's economy at the back. The Viper has a very wide open economy, in fact, with no defensive castles, and if you watch my videos at all, then you know how much I love my defensive castles. I think they're great, and when I look at the way that Jordan's base is set up, I actually like his castle positioning just a little bit more, because should the Viper, actually get any units into Jordan's economy, the castles will be able to deal with most of the army, and Jordan won't have to pull back as many troops, whereas if the Viper gets raided, he's going to have to pull his entire army back if he wants to keep those villagers alive, and that could be devastating. Both players here getting ready to move out, and it looks like Jordan considering adding in some cavaliers with his army. Now, one thing I didn't get a chance to really bring up is that the Viper, he's getting two-handed swordsman, man. This guy's insane. For the first time in competitive Age of Empires 2 history, or just Age of Empires 2 history, a player asked himself, oh my god, throwing axemen are so OP, how do I counter them? Of course, champions are certainly a good thought here. When your opponent is, heavily incentivized to be making things like halberdiers and throwing axemen, champions are pretty good here. They're not like the best against throwing axemen because throwing axemen have the range advantage, but champions are great late game insurance here. They are so good against the trash units, the units that don't cost gold, the elite skirmisher, the light cavalry, the hussar, the halberdier units are very, very good against that. Halberdiers are a very critical part of this matchup, and the thing is that the Viper is going to have such a strong answer to halberdiers. Jordan's not going to feel comfortable doing that, and as a result, since the Viper has, champion in the back, he's going to go grab that upgrade right about now. Since he's researching that, well, Jordan's going to feel pressured to spend all of his resources on, gold costing units rather than making things like halberdiers. And I just like the Viper's army a little bit better. I feel like he's getting more value out of his guys, a lot more mileage out of them, whereas since, Jordan is going to be teching into, Cavalier and Paladin, that's so much gold down the drain. I mean, we check out Jordan's resources, he's behind by a whopping 2,000 gold, and that will add up. In fact, more than 2,000. Viper almost done with champion, and this is going to be a really, really critical engagement. However, he has so many bombard cannons here. That's a lot of money. I think that actually Jordan will be able to come out on top in this engagement in the short run, but in the long run, I fear for him. I still think he's able to clean this up. Those Onager blasts coming into play here. The thing is they're not able to kill the Throwing Axemen with one Onager shot. That's really, really substantial. Throwing Axemen are also decent against the Paladins. They're not that great. But we can see here, like, these guys getting nicked by the Onager shots, but they're not dying. Hand Cannoneers absolutely would have. The Onager shot's still doing a lot of work here. The Viper just had so many bombard cannons in there, so much stuff lost. He has the hill, but I don't think that's enough. These Cavaliers soaking up enough damage. These Throwing Axemen just getting so many shots off, and the Viper lost so much gold here, but he still has 4,000 in the bank, and that might just be enough. Jordan moving in a couple of his monks. Paladin upgrade is so very close. But this allows, though, even though the Viper is going to get cleaned up here and lose a lot of money, this might favor the Viper in the long run, as weird as that sounds, because the Viper here gets to save cash. He didn't get Paladin. He didn't get Cavalier. In fact, I wonder if he did this on purpose and maybe even tried to, like, bait Jordan into making Paladins by having so many, I guess, under-escorted bombard cannons and having that many Throwing Axemen. Sort of incentivizes, encourages your opponent to get Paladin. Really just eats right into their gold. If we check out the gold difference here, it's pretty massive, 400 to 3,160, so that's a pretty big difference here. Every little penny counts the longer the game goes on, and now the Viper has a cheap excuse to just make some halberdiers, and if he's making halberdiers, he's saving his gold, and with the 3k gold lead, that certainly matters. It looks like Jordan is going to try and come in here and see if he can get any raiding done, but the Viper does have just a couple of sort of choke points, sort of funneling the opponent's units around his castle so they'll take a lot of damage, but Jordan might still be able to get in here anyway. We'll have to see. As he's moving the line forward, the Viper needs to find an opportunity to go mass up his army just a little bit more, and he has a few champions in here, which will be nice. They'll be able to soak up those axe shots, come up there, and do a lot of damage. We'll have to see how that pays off, as he is indeed at the population cap. Both players very, very close to it. Jordan just 9 underneath it. Those Paladins are going to get in here, and oh man, this is when you need defensive castles. The Viper kicking himself. He's like, crap, man, if only I had a castle like right here. All those farmers tragically underprotected. The Viper's going to have to, send some halberdiers over here, but the Viper is prepared. He did have 3 barracks on the left over here, and he will be able to stream those halbs in order to go protect himself. So he's not completely doomed here. However, when you're the guy who has to repair your castle while it's getting trebbed down, that is generally very bad, because you have to spend so much stone on the defensive while you're just trying to kill your opponents like trebuchets. Like, you're going to lose it eventually. And I like that he's getting hoardings here, and he's getting architecture, as we can see in the top right. That's going to make this trebuchet siege a lot less effective, and perhaps Jordan should redeploy these trebs at the top of this hill. I think he's doing it just because he's concerned that he will be a little bit too close to the Viper's own siege line if he does that. But he has to be really, really careful here. The Viper is still actually able to win this sort of repair fest. Jordan not completely out of gold mines, by the way. He does have 2 actually at the back over here, and just a smidgen left in his own base. So the fact that the Viper has basically saved 3k gold here on upgrades isn't actually relevant yet. So that's a pretty big victory for Jordan, and he does have a reasonable lead, utilizing the ever elusive box formation here for style points. So Jordan pulling ahead both in physical points as well as the style ones. The style ones, of course, being by far the more important ones in competitive Age of Empires 2. Age of Fashion 2. Can you win looking good? Looks like the Viper is going to be, with that Siege Engineer's upgrade, will be able to pressure those trebuchets from a safe distance. But he has to watch out for those Paladins. He has to watch out. And the Viper needs to regroup his army. He's down by about 25 population here. He has to be very, very careful about that. But the Throwing Axemen will be able to deter those Paladins from charging in here. And as a result, the Viper gets to keep his bombard cannons, but he does not get to keep his castle, and he has to pull the line back just a little bit. It's a lot of idols. It's a lot of units that he had to pull back. And by having those units back at his own base, that means that Jordan gets free reign on this battlefield. However many units there are over here, about 10-ish or 15 or so, like that's just 15 that aren't at the front line, and that means that Jordan gets to move up. He's just pulling all those like idle like gold miners and stuff that he doesn't need, those excess gold miners, lumberjacks, bringing them to the front line, using to go build more barracks, more siege workshops. Hopefully we see Paladin really come into play here, as the Viper got Paladin, which is pretty good against Throwing Axemen. It's not amazing. It's okay. It's okay. And it's exceptional against halberdiers and skirmishers, so should this game drag on long enough, then the Viper might end up getting some sick value out of champions, or will champions be a dud this game? We'll have to see. We'll have to see, but right now, Jordan's army comp, much scarier than the Vipers, but the Vipers, much more cost-efficient in a long-term engagement. So, you know, the Viper will win this game should it drag out long enough, but Jordan, he's on a timer. He has so much money in this army that he has to be very, very careful with how he uses it. Trying to take any free damage here if he can, as he needs to... God, because all of his units are at such a different speed and he has so many different types of them, controlling them all at the same time is going to be one hell of a job. Looks like the Viper will finally have closed off this area. He's kind of content to let the fight continue on the right-hand side of the map, and both players are going to regroup. Looks like Jordan now is going to be grabbing his halberdier upgrade, tracking and everything, and yes, please! Champions, do something this game. That's what I want to see. Throwing Axemen have been the MVP, but the only thing that could make this game better is if champions are also good too. Come on, man. Gotta see some champions. Don't let me down, the Viper. He's never let us down before. Will he let us down this time? Continue watching and find out. And while I'm off on a brief little tangent, by the way, if you'd like to get in on my weekly Age of Empires 2 Twitch TV live streams, by all means, link on the screen or in the video description below. I'd love to have you. You can find my live stream schedule on my Twitch TV page by scrolling underneath the video player there. Update it every day, so keep your eyes peeled. Now back into the game itself, both players going to be shooting cannonballs at each other. How inhumane. And it looks like Jordan will lose a couple of his bombard cannons, but he's out of cash. Oh my goodness, only 200 gold left in the bank. Well, he might have a few relics, but that's not quite enough, as these gold mines in the corner are indeed running out. Piles upon piles of idle villagers, and now the shoe's on the other foot. The Viper getting ready for a counterattack. He's got loads of money. He's got 3,000 gold in the bank. He's totally okay with this. Jordan has the hill advantage, so he will take a little bit less damage from those bombarded cannons, and Jordan has to walk the world's slowest throwing Axemen army up to the front lines to go deal with this. And one thing that I really liked that they did in the Forgotten was that they made the Franks get squires. I kind of understand that the developers might have been concerned originally that you give the Franks squires and they're suddenly like throwing Axemen are OP if you can actually micro them, but they're so slow without squires. I don't think it actually makes them OP. So I'm actually really glad that they get that. As we can see right here, they're just too darn slow. Jordan just sort of caught with his pants down right now. He has to think of something to break this siege line, and while he's spending so much time repairing this, the Viper is just doing so much damage here. This is absolutely fantastic. Alright, as we do see a little bit of an engagement going on here, but Jordan will be losing a couple of throwing axemen for free, walking just a little bit too far forward, and wow. Well, this is gonna be a tricky one. Like, Jordan has to think of something. He doesn't want to move his like onagers up right now. Otherwise, he's concerned that the Viper will just blow them up with a bombard cannon shot, which would be devastating. Oh my goodness, in the meantime! Jordan, what are you doing? Jordan, my friend, what is this? Oh my god, taking a page out of Doubt's playbook. This is absolutely ridiculous. Oh my god. I was about to say, you know, like, it's not like anyone's gonna be chopping through the middle of the map, right? Because neither of these players get siege onagers. So without siege onagers, you can't actually just remove the trees very cleanly unless you use trebuchets. And we all know how often trebuchets like to just miss the trees. It's so bloody inefficient and annoying. I did not expect this, but I love this. Jordan, he's like, okay, all right, I'm in a stall. What do I do? There's no buildings to siege safely with trebuchets. I've already been sieging them over this tree line. What can I do to break this stall? The Great Equalizer, raiding. Raiding will allow him to pull so very hard, far ahead in this game, and the Viper! No defensive castles at his back line. He has one right over here, which he built because he was tired of getting, raided and whatnot. Wasn't reinforced pretty easily, but he's got nothing at the back over here, and if you've never seen a PSA for defensive castles, you've got it right here. Poor the Viper is gonna get so much idle time. This town center is packed with lazy, stupid villagers who can't path around trees or anything. They're all stuck inside that town center. They can't get out, do their farming, and as a result, the Viper has to pull back all of his halberdiers to deal with this. And look what this means. Jordan now has an opportunity to mount a powerful counterattack. I like that the expert players in Age of Empires 2 are all about just wasting nothing, getting as much mileage as they can out of everything. And that's why Jordan is like, well, why delete my extra lumberjacks when I can just pull them forward and just use them as meat shields or to repair my own onagers? Why not? Why not, I say. And it works. The Viper got devastated by that sneak attack through the middle, cutting those trees with the trebuchet line. How very cute. Jordan making a very, very clever gamble there, and looks like he's actually managed to sort of even things out. I mean, the Viper is down to 500 gold, which is, well, actually exactly the same amount of gold that our good friend Jordan has. So suddenly, all the Viper's money down the drain, and well, I guess he's not going to get any value out of the champions. I mean, he's making a couple of them, right? Because this is where the champions really shine. They're very, very good against an army that is like half halberdiers or mostly halberdiers and has like a bit of throwing axemen in there. Like, not like a mass throwing axemen army, but they're very, very good against that sort of defensive Frank army that has a small chunk of throwing axemen and a bunch of halbs. Like, that's where the champion really shines. And when your opponent has to make light cavalry too, and they're even considering making elite skirmishers, champions get better and better and better. So the Viper might be able to get a little bit of value out of that. We'll have to see as Jordan moving line forward. He weakened the Viper's economy so very much by opening up another front. How unbelievably clever. And it looks like he's still just able to put the pressure on over here as the Viper is sort of twiddling his thumbs. He's not really sure if he can actually stop this anymore. Jordan applying so much pressure on both sides, the Viper just drastically behind in population as we see here. He's down by about 70, trying his hardest to reinforce, and even though Jordan spends so much money on upgrades, it's actually okay. It actually kind of evened out in the end. I guess like almost all the Viper's money just went into so many bombard cannons down the drain, and perhaps onagers here are really the answer. Able to, trade perhaps one onager for, 10, even 20 units if you get some good enough shots off. That's quite nice. Bombard cannon also a great way to go break a siege stall. The Viper going to put down another siege workshop at the back, trying to replace all of his lost military buildings, but in the meantime, his front line crumbling rapidly, just doesn't have enough military units to back up and protect these bombard cannons, and as a result, he is going to die real soon if he doesn't think of something. Jordan going to try his best to, clump up against the wall, just sort of sneak around here, sneaky throwing axemen, do a little bit of raiding with the world's slowest unit. Jordan is going to, throw in some light cavalry again to just be conservative with his resources. That's another change I love in the Forgotten, where they gave the Franks the new unique technology chivalry, which makes it so their stable units are trained 40% faster. This means that like massing light cavalry for them is still bad, but it's bad and fast. And bad and fast is a slogan that I can get behind. I like that one a lot. So it looks like we're going to see a little bit more raiding on the left-hand side. And again, oh man, if the Viper had a castle over here or something like that, then he would not have to worry about this at all. Having to pull back all those troops to defend against this, the game-winning play by far, ladies and gentlemen, was Jordan's decision to make a couple trebs and just cut through the middle here. Like, the Viper didn't really expect it, neither did I. It's certainly a clever one. I love it. Taking a page out of Doubt's playbook. And Jordan here with his army of trash units. I mean, this is where if the Viper had money, he'd be able to deal with this quite nicely, but he just doesn't. He just doesn't have the military for this anymore. I mean, both players not really able to get pop capped anymore as they're struggling to adapt to this post-apocalyptic goldless society where neither of them can actually afford to really make those gold units. Now they're desperately to like transition into trash units. Look at the Viper, he's putting down like a second blacksmith and like a bunch of archery ranges. Or did he lose his original blacksmith? He actually might have. He's putting down a bunch of archery ranges. He's like, all right, guys, we're an hour in. It's time for skirmishers with no padded archer armor. So it's the struggle. You never really want to get into this awkward stage as the Franks, where it's sort of like a cripple fight. Both players going to be slapping each other, as they don't really have very good trash lines. So it can be very tricky to actually close out a game. But really, like, Jordan just happens to have a much bigger army now. He's the aggressor. By keeping the Viper contained in his own base, he's going to come out on top here. And another thing is that both players, of course, could also be taking advantage of the market and selling some of that bulk wood that they both have stockpiled, some of that bulk food. That certainly helps out quite a bit, especially with the guild's upgrade. It allows you to pull ahead in the late game, so I would love to see something like that. Well, here's the time when going for hand cannoneers would have been okay, because then he would have had chemistry. You would have already... Oh, wait, actually, he does have chemistry. Yeah, you would have had all your, archer armor upgrades. You would have already had the archer ranges, but... Still, throwing axemen, basically a huge focus of this game. We've only seen a little bit of knight play. We've only seen a little bit of paladin play. And Jordan moving up here. If the Viper can win this battle, he can turn this game around. He has the home field advantage, but he has no answer to those trebuchets. He needs more bombard cannons. And man, the one time the Viper doesn't have any more bombard cannons, he needs them. He's got one coming out right now. Can he deal with this army? Only time will tell. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but doesn't look like the champion's gonna get too much done over here. The Viper gonna try and back up. He's only making skirmishers because he has to. It's not like they're particularly good against any of the units in this army, and Throwing Axemen are pretty good against trash in general. They're just, they're a reasonably strong unit. They're pretty cheap. They have real applications, but, you know, they're certainly less good in a team game at least. But if you're on the flank, if you're in a 1v1, think about it. At least in a Frank Smear match, they're a great deterrent to trash units, and that's what your opponent is generally going to be answering your knights with. Both players really just taking advantage of each other, really understanding how this matchup works, and just shifting around between their units. The thing is, though, is that Jordan has been actually calling a lot of the shots, and even though Viper has been playing sort of a value game here, it hasn't actually been working out for him that well. It was going okay until his economy just got decimated by that raid. And it looks like, well, both of them are very, very close in population. In fact, they're actually exactly even. But Jordan gonna be like, all right, I'm not going through these castles. Instead, I'm going to the left. There is the market. There is the market. We'll see at the end of the game. I'll check at the end exactly how much of that they've actually used. Oh, wait, no, I can do that. Do that right now, right? I'm gonna switch over to this. All right, let's check out the sold. Ooh, that's a lot. of food and wood sold for the Viper. Actually, 3,000 food sold, 2,100 wood sold, and well, it definitely adds up. I like that the Viper's doing this. You know, he still has like no gold, but yeah, that's why it's okay to sort of overboom a little bit, especially if you think the game's going to drag on, because that way you have something to sell for your gold. You'll have wood to sell, you'll have food to sell. That's great. And it looks like the Viper actually ahead in military. Are you kidding me? Are we serious? Really? Alright, well I guess, you know, being able to have a couple of skirmishers in here certainly helps. The real question is, which unit is shittier in this matchup? The light cavalry or the elite skirmisher? Both players, again, forced into making suboptimal unit choices because they just don't have the cash anymore. The Viper making elite skirmishers, whereas Jordan, you know, he's opting for the light cavalry route, but I guess the elite skirmishers being able to just take out this halberdiers from a distance, I believe the elite skirmishers have a small attack bonus versus like spearmen, halberdiers, and stuff. It's a tiny one, but it does add up. Yeah, they're able to trade pretty efficiently here, and halberdiers are just a straight-up hard counter to that light cavalry. So perhaps the Viper's army comp is a little bit better here. Jordan has to be really careful with this army, but because like he has all those trebs at the back, and if he loses them, there's no way he's gonna be able to replace them. Still though, Jordan has had more throwing axemen in his army, and maybe that's what he needs. He has more throwing axemen in here, and both players' population dropping rapidly. Oh my god, this is so close. This one battering ram over here is the Viper trying his best to soak up those shots, but that doesn't work against throwing axemen, because throwing axemen eat right through those rams. And both players still dropping population. It's actually really not clear who's going to win this fight. We're gonna have to see, are the elite skirmishers enough? I don't know. In the meantime though, Jordan killing so many buildings with those trebuchets. It's the elephant in the room that has not been answered yet at all. Jordan asking all the questions. The Viper having most of the answers, but this might be the question that he just can't figure out. This army moving in. The trebuchets are wreaking havoc on his base. While he's fighting Jordan's units, he can't answer these trebs, and as a result, the Viper might just very well lose entirely. This is the sticking point here. And the whole skirmishers versus light cavalry thing, don't know how much that really matters. Perhaps just having extra throwing axemen in this case. Again, throwing axemen, the MVP, this entire game sort of revolves around them. Who needs knights, man, when you got an infinite supply of axes? I want you to ask yourself what you think would hurt more. Battle axe to the face? Or just a guy on a horse? I think the battle axe to the face, especially considering how many battle axes these guys have, sounds like it would hurt a lot, and I would really not like to deal with that. But you could say that you wouldn't want to deal with paladins either. I don't know where these guys are getting all their axes from, but all we know is that they do have an infinite supply of them, infinitely deep pockets, and as a result, these javelins just not good enough. The Viper losing ground rapidly, trying his best to hold the line, but when you're constantly on the defense all game, you're not the one like dictating the plays, then eventually you're gonna lose. As Jordan is slowly inching the line forward, this mass group of trebuchets is truly the stall breaker here, able to protect it, and as a result, he's just pulling ahead. He's throwing axemen. Like, the Viper just doesn't have enough gold to deal with this anymore, and even though he built the market first and he got a lot of value out of that, that extra gold didn't matter. The Viper running out of ground, running out of places for his economy, running out of military production facilities, and yet he's still almost even in population somehow. Ah, Jesus. I mean, both players actually with honestly probably slightly too small economies. I can't wait, really? Is the Viper ahead on villagers? Oh, Jordan been pulling off so many villagers to repair those trebs and just be meat shields, I guess, that somehow... Yeah, okay, the Viper is the only Age of Empires 2 player where he can lose this much of his base and still have a villager lead. That's the Viper for you. Yeah, I guess Jordan was pulled so many villagers. I feel like both of these players do have a pretty tiny economy. I mean, you could argue that they're both floating like a lot of food and wood. Well, I guess the Viper actually has nothing floating, so... Perhaps the Viper needs a little bit of a larger economy. I guess he doesn't have any resources to spare to make more villagers, and perhaps Jordan doesn't need a bigger economy because he's filthy rich, but yeah, I would have expected perhaps a little bit more on the villager side. I mean, the Viper just doesn't really have any town centers to... Well, I guess he literally doesn't have any town centers to go sustain villager production and make more. Yeah, he literally doesn't have a town center to expand his economy, and lo and behold, an hour and 15 minutes in, Jordan wants to be cool too. He's going to be getting... his own skirmishers, however, not elite, so they're not as cool as the Viper's army, and as a result, he's going to have to go wait until he gets those upgrades. I do have to say, though, that both players have been playing exceptionally well, but Jordan with, like, some brilliant decision-making this game. He is one of the best players in Age of Empires 2, like, by far. Like, Jordan is so good at this game. That's why I always love watching his matches. He's clever. Jordan doesn't always play by the book, and... Certainly chopping through the middle here on Hideout just goes to show his expertise on this map, and wow, that was like the game-winning play. And he is going to come out on top and actually beat the Viper in this 1 versus 1 as the Franks. Both players showcasing that knights suck. Who needs them? Knight, what's that? I only make throwing axemen. The Franks, they're an infantry civilization. That's what we learned today. Oh man, this was a fun one, and a really long epic game in that. Very close, the Viper doing such a good job defending against Jordan's attack, but you know, Jordan being able to cut through this area, get in there, just really punish the Viper for his his castle placement. I love how much Jordan was pressuring over the other side of this wood line, really just to really mess with the Viper's economy, and it paid off in the long run for sure. As you know, these castle fights as well. Yeah, attacking into Paladin, you know, is certainly a very big gold sink, but in the end, in retrospect, it did pay off. It gave Jordan just enough firepower that he could kill all of the Viper's bombard cannons. The Viper this game has had so many of them, perhaps not enough regular military troops to back them up. Since Jordan was able to kill all those bombard cannons, that really turned the game around, and it might have actually been worth the massive gold investment that he spent on that. The Viper saved so much gold on upgrades in the early to mid game, but it didn't actually matter as Jordan was able to put those paladins to actually great use, and well, the Viper didn't have an answer to all of Jordan's gold army for very long. Those champions, interesting idea. Reasonable against throwing axemen, but as long as it's not a full throwing axemen army, as long as there's just the tip and the focus is on more or less trash units, but Viper never really got any value out of them. So while the Viper was working on his champion upgrade, well, Jordan was working on his paladin upgrade, and the paladin one actually did something, and the champion not so much here, which is a shame because the champions would have been good in the late game when the Viper had no gold to actually use them. So that is how the crow flies. And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time to go to the achievements. Let's check this out. Alright, so if we take a look at this, it just goes to show how close this game actually was when the units killed and units lost for both players are very much close to even. Jordan, though, able to convert an extra 2 units, which certainly helps, and holy crap! Wait, did the Viper really not blow up a single building that entire game? Well, okay, so this match also not only shows that the Franks have certainly a wider variety of viable unit choices than it might seem, a lot of situational ones for sure, but being the aggressor, assuming you don't lose too much, is oh so totally worth it. Oh my god, really? Did the Viper not kill a single building the entire game? Oh, when you're the person who's always defending, you can play to not lose, but really, you got to play to win. Sometimes you have to take risks, and Jordan took a lot of risks this game, knowing that if he just tried to take the Viper on in a straight-up fight until the end of time, the Viper had an additional 3,000 gold in the bank, which I'm assuming almost all of it went into those bombard cannons. With an extra 3k gold in the bank, Jordan was like, okay, well, the Viper didn't actually get paladins, so he has a bunch of gold in the bank. I gotta got to think of something to even this out, and he ended up cutting through the middle, and while the Viper tried to make some aggressive plays, he actually never actually successfully blew up a building. Like, Jordan able to defend his castle. I like that he put his castle on the hill. The onagers, I think, as well, were pretty helpful. Again, that's a very, very big upgrade that the Viper skipped out on, again, saving him a lot of gold. But onagers here, one of my favorite units. It's so good at trading efficiently. I think that got Jordan a lot of value this game. I do think it made a big difference, and it allowed him to successfully, you know, defend against all the sieging, to just sort of deal with the Viper's army a little bit better and make it worth that gold investment. Sure, the mass bombard cannons are really good against the onagers, but I guess another way to look at it is that when you make that many onagers, you kind of bait the Viper into making a ton of bombard cannons, and then as a result, you can make paladins and clean up all those bombard cannons. So it's really cool how those dynamics work. The late game of Age of Empires 2, there's a lot of mind games in it. Who can, you know, out-transition your opponent? Whoever has the better unit choices and is in the right place at the right time making good strategy choices will come out on top at the end. And wow. It's really funny to me that at the end of the game that that actually the Viper had a bigger economy than Jordan. I think this is really interesting. Wow. 99% of the map explored. Ooh. It's pretty efficient. Both players here, of course, getting, you know, minimum of 100 villagers, or we'll see around like 125 is a good way to go. And then over time, they'll clear out those extra excess gold miners. The Viper with one extra relic capture, again, giving him extra incentive to just sort of play it straight and duke it out in the right-hand little choke point. But Jordan doesn't want to play that game, recognize the situation. 1,500 gold is huge. And Jordan, going to break the stall, end the game a little bit early, goes straight through the middle, and as a result, he comes out on top. So GG, well played, guys. I really hope that you guys enjoyed watching this match as much as I did. This is one of the cooler Age of Empires matches I've seen in a little while. But of course, if you're looking for more Age of Empires 2 goodness, then you're in the right place. I have plenty of other Break the Meta episodes, videos of Age of Empires 2, and videos of other games on my YouTube channel. You can find all of that by just heading on over and looking through all those playlists. I have a bunch of them in the video description. If you enjoyed watching this video, one of the best ways to support my channel is just leave a like rating on every video. It helps me out a ton. And of course, I also do read all of your comments below, even if I don't get a chance to respond to each of them individually, so feel free to leave one. Let me know what you think. I always love to hear if you guys enjoyed it or not, and I'll make sure to give those all a look. As always, guys, thank you so much for your support. I look forward to seeing you all in the future, whether on YouTube or at my weekly Twitch TV live streams. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. GG, well played.